All right. Started a minute early, but that's okay, right? So we'll just see how things are all working. It's been a while since I did this. Tell me if there are sound problems or anything like that. I presume you can all hear me. I don't have a lot of viewers, but that's okay. We'll start approximately on time anyway. Okay. So let's see. Stream health is excellent. That's good. The mic sounds a bit muffled. And the video looks a little bit blurry. I don't know what's going on there. Let's see. I'll turn that up a little. I've got everything connected, I hope. Let's see. Audio, yeah, it's all going to the right place. Okay. So I'm just going to charge in. Let's start talking. So what this is all about, do you use the mic on your headset? No, I do not use, there is no mic on my headset. Look here. Anyway, let's pretend you can hear me well enough, and I will do some troubleshooting some other time, make sure everything's working perfectly. Yeah, so I'm using a Logitech camera, and I don't know, it's a little blurry. I set the background to this yellow orange gradient because it's hot out there. It's hot everywhere, and it doesn't seem to like it very much. It's kind of blurring up, or yeah. Anyway, don't worry about it. So what this is all about, this is a Patreon Q&A that I'm also letting everybody see and ask questions. So we're just going to open it up to everyone. I put out a call on Patreon to get any questions people might have. I got one. Okay, yeah, we're off to a roaring start. But that, I think part of the problem there is simply that I have not been doing this in a while. You got to build a habit to build an audience, right? So what I want to talk about is the one question I got some other questions that came up in email and various things like that, and I thought I would talk about those a little bit, and then I go off and babble about whatever I felt like. If you have questions, yes, you can feel free to chime in. I will keep an eye on the chat and see what comes up. And otherwise, I'll just talk about a few things. Okay, so let's try this. Let's see if I can share screen for this. So yes, I got a question on Patreon, and I am prioritizing Patreon questions. So here's a really basic one. Yeah. Oh, I get a comment here. When I move, it goes blurry and clear. I'm clearly gonna have to work on a better camera setup. Anyway, so here's the question that was brought up. So this person asked, I wanted to ask if ring species is still a good argument for evolution, and which would be the best examples. And so that's an easy one. Good. Starts me off in my comfort zone. Yes, of course, ring species are still good examples to use. Oh, I got another question here. Is it possible to join the Zoom call, or do we just ask questions in the chat? You can join the Zoom call if you're a patron on Patreon. So it's exclusive to that, but otherwise just ask questions in the chat. Okay, so about ring species, of course they're good. So I pulled up my evolutionary biology textbook when I teach it. This is the book I use. and there's not, it's a little bit about, it has a little bit, not a lot, about ring species. But of course they're good because ring species are excellent examples. As the book says, ring species offer particularly compelling evidence that one species can split into two. So that's the big thing here, is that what you can find is these closely related species that have the capability of interbreeding, but at some end of the range, the individuals can no longer interbreed, or at least choose not to interbreed. So it says our example is the Siberian greenish warbler, Phyloscopus trochilides. And they talk a little bit about that. This is, I don't know if you can see this well enough here, but yeah, you can't, but also just tell you what it says. So this warbler forms a ring around the Tibetan plateau. And although their songs increase in complexity from south to north around both sides of this loop, the birds view each other as conspecifics and interbreed everywhere they meet, with an exception. The exception is in central Siberia, where the northeastern and northwestern forms decline to mate. So yeah, of course, ring species are still perfectly good to discuss in the context of speciation, of examples of speciation, that yeah, they do diverge over space. And now this is where it gets complicated. Is that a good model for how species diverge over time? That's a topic for some debate. But sure, you can still use ring species. The whole point is that species are very fuzzy and blurry, kind of like my image on the screen when I do this. And that blurriness, that vagueness in the species definition is an example of how species are not absolute. They're not fixed. They can change over time and space. And so, yeah, that's perfectly compatible with our understanding of evolutionary theory. Okay, I hope I answered that question. Now, what else did I want to talk about? Oh, a question I got in email. So let me stop this thing, and let's share a different example here. Where did it go? Oh, I see what I have to do. I hope it's gonna let me do this. So, oh, I see what it's doing. It's messing me up. I have to bring it to the front here, and then I'll be able to do this. Yeah, sorry. I'm struggling with a few things to make them work. Okay, I'll jump ahead to this one because it's here and I see what I have to do in the future. All right. So this is a story that got me pissed off yesterday. Oh, we got comments here. Yeah. So Anthony mentions in California, we have the Ensatina salamanders, who are a ring species around the Central Valley. So yeah, there's numerous examples of ring species, and they're all just demonstrating that species blur together in interesting ways, and they separate over time and all that kind of good stuff. Oh yeah. Okay. So what do I want to talk about here? Well, this is Bret Weinstein. Oh man, that guy. It's really kind of tragic. Bret Weinstein was an evolutionary biologist. He taught evolutionary biology at Evergreen College. And then, as many of you know, he lost his position. He protested the fact that they had a day where traditionally what would happen is all the minority students would leave the campus and protest for, policies against minorities and so forth. And one year they said, okay, we've been doing this, but it's time for you to participate. And they told all the white professors, yeah, you should be the ones who take a day off campus and we'll stay on campus. Just a nice reversal. And, if this happened at my campus, I would participate. I would join in gratefully, and I would agree that this is something we need to do, but not Bret Weinstein and not his wife hire. They said no, we're not going to do this, and they raised a stink about it, and people raised a stink about them, and so there was a big foo-for-all about all of this, and he settled with the university after trying to sue them, and he settled and got hundreds of thousands of dollars, nice little retirement nest egg, and got out of there. So he and his wife both left the university, and they are now involved in a lucrative career with the intellectual dark web and the alt-right and all that. It's just, anyway. So what this is Bret Weinstein appeared on the Tucker Carlson show. Woohoo. Okay, and let's see if this works. Let me know if the sound comes through. Yes, Weinstein. He's a whiner. Anyway, here's what he did. He appeared on the Tucker Carlson show, and Carlson asked him about vaccines. And this is just the most craven crap. Let me just play this for you.
So I thought the vaccines were our best hope, and I was concerned at first about the fact that because the vaccines are novel and because the testing process was accelerated, that we couldn't possibly know anything about their long-term harms, but I was hopeful that they would turn out to be safe in the long term, and I thought I would ultimately be vaccinated. And then, as I wasn't initially eligible to be vaccinated, and so I was watching the signs. I was watching for signs that there was anything about the vaccines to be concerned about, and I began to be alarmed. There's a very strong signal in the VAERS database of harms that are not long-term harms, that are short-term harms, some of them catastrophic, quite a number of unexplained deaths. And I started to talk about the vaccines and the various questions surrounding them. Not only is there the question of the harms that they may do to individuals who get them, but there's also a question about what they will do to the epidemic itself. So there's a category. We desire, when we make a vaccine, that it be what we call perfect, which means that there are no breakthrough cases.
Okay, wait a minute now. This is true. We would love to have perfect vaccines. There are no perfect vaccines. Every vaccine is going to have some weaknesses, in particular what he talks about here.
In this case, we don't have perfect vaccines, and although the numbers are very good, they do indeed prevent most people from contracting COVID. Enough people who have the vaccines come down with what we call a breakthrough case, that they exert a kind of selection on the virus, and that selection can cause the epidemic to change by creating escape mutants or variants.
So the vaccine itself could make the coronavirus into something different and potentially more harmful?
Yes. People will remember from the beginning of the pandemic when there was a lot of talk about something called herd immunity.
Yes.
Herd immunity arises when enough people have immunity to the virus that an infected person's pathogen can't find a next victim. And if the number of next victims drops low enough, then the pathogen will go to extinction. The problem is that the vaccines being imperfect causes selection on the virus for those variants that are invisible to the immune system. So in some sense, it resets the herd immunity that we had acquired from such a large percentage of the population having already had COVID. And yes, it can change the pandemic. So we don't know where that will end up, but it is something we need to be aware of. This is not simply a good technology that is going to end the pandemic. This is something we need to be watching carefully.
Okay. Yes, as Callisto says in the chat, this is going to hurt. yes, it hurts. Because this is just stupid. This is just bad science that he's talking about here. He does not discuss that what's even more painful for us is all the people who are not vaccinated. That what we've got is a pool, a reservoir of people who are culturing the vaccine in their bodies. And that's an even greater effect on the emergence of new mutants. That, with his logic, what this would say is that somehow, we shouldn't have vaccinated against polio. That when we were vaccinating against polio, we were just creating selection pressure for more dangerous polio variants to emerge. And that's just, yeah, as Nestle said, he's making the rookie mistake that the right mutations somehow arise when it's needed. And this is not the issue here. That what's happening is we're getting, we will be getting new variants, but they're mainly going to arise in the unvaccinated population. So this is BS, total BS on his part. Now, I thought, okay, he is a credentialed evolutionary biologist. I should go looking and see if there's anything that might justify this. So yes, I did some research, and I went looking for this whole issue of imperfect vaccines. It's a real thing. People talk about it. So here's an article that was in Nature, imperfect vaccines and the evolution of pathogen virulence. And it is talking about this particular paper is mostly mathematical modeling of what would happen. And it mentions right here, vaccines rarely provide full protection from the disease. This is true. And he said, and it goes on to say, nevertheless, partially effective, imperfect vaccines may be used to protect both individuals and the whole populations. So it's kind of undermining his whole point, because what's going on here is, yeah, this does occur. Is it a worry? Not really. This paper is talking specifically about different targets in these infectious diseases that we could be aiming for. And for example, it's talking about malaria. So in malaria, for instance, you could expect a vaccine that is targeting the infection by malaria, or it's targeting the growth rate of malaria, all this other stuff that could be going on. And it proposes that, that there is a possibility under some regimens that you could produce a more dangerous pathogen by selecting for the wrong thing. And in particular, it uses the example of targeting for growth rates. That you have an individual who's got a great many pathogens in their body, and if you hit them with a vaccine against growth rates, what will happen is the susceptible pathogens will slow down, but there will be some that escape that and thrive in that environment and take over. And then you've got a population of pathogens that can escape your particular vaccine, your particular treatment. But as it says here, this is a kind of an important point. In contrast, infection blocking vaccines induce no such effects and can even select for lower virulence. So it's kind of the opposite of what he is saying. He's making an invalid inference from this kind of study. I don't know if this is the one he read. This is from 2001, so it's a while back. But yeah, this is something people have been thinking about. Note, however, that when you read the literature about COVID-19, what the pharmaceutical companies are doing, they are specifically targeting things like that spike protein that facilitates the introduction of the virus into target cells. So they are actually directly combating infection. So none of what Weinstein said applied. Okay, so yeah, ignore all that stuff. What's really going on is that Weinstein is appearing on Tucker Carlson, and he's being a coward, and he's pandering to the prejudices of the audience. because he doesn't want to be blocked from appearing on such a high profile show as Tucker Carlson's. So he's just caving. He's just saying what he thinks the audience wants to hear. And this is contrary to what any good scientist ought to do. If I were on Tucker Carlson's show, there's no hope of that happening. The first thing I would do to prepare is I would contact my buddies who are epidemiologists and virologists and ask them for the state of the science on that. And it would not be kind to Carlson's point of view. And that's what I would be saying on the show. Again, no worry, I'm never going to appear on Tucker Carlson, even if I were invited, which I won't be. I would refuse because he's an idiot. Anyway, I also, along the way, while I was researching this, I found this lovely little article here in the Houston Press. Bret Weinstein is simply a right-wing media grifter in the vein of conservative political commentator Ben Shapiro and Canadian professor of psychology Dr. Jordan Peterson, part of the intellectual dark web, a term his brother Eric coined, and Eric is even worse than Bret. Weinstein has risen in prominence over the last year as other members of the IDW have lost relevance. Yeah, the IDW is kind of hiding in shame right now, I think. So it gives a little bit of the background on Weinstein. You know, he spoke out against college's traditional day of absence, where minority students, in fact, who would absent themselves to show their contribution to the college. He and his wife, Heather Haying, left. They resigned. And as it says, Weinstein began his career playing a skeptical maverick who was cast out by political correctness. No, he was cast out because he was an asshole. Oh, well, there goes all the monetization. Anyway, it's worth it. Yeah, so his job is to gussy up white nationalism and other alt-right talking points to make them palatable for the mainstream. Yeah. So Weinstein is just an awful person, an awful chicken shit coward who is pandering to the right wing. And that's how he gets all the media appearances. Yeah, okay, in the chat, Mr. Piece of Work says, where's how? Yeah, well, Eric Weinstein has zero credibility in biology, in evolutionary biology in particular. He's just a banker. Guy who makes a lot of money. So yeah, no. Anyway, so that's where that stands. Don't believe anything that Bret or Eric Weinstein ever says on the media, but he's going to continue to get this kind of noise. It's disgraceful. Yeah. All right, let me get rid of that. I don't want to talk about that anymore. What else? Well, let's see. Oh, yeah, I was going to mention this one. This one's a little trickier. This one is another messy article that was brought to my attention because it comes out of my alma mater, which is University of Oregon. And you know, it's not as terrible as Bret Weinstein. I can at least say that. I don't have any major complaints about this, except that it's kind of perfectly normal, kind of expected result. And it's also a little bit outside of my field of expertise. So what I will say is this is an article in, oh, what is this? This is the University of Oregon, what is it? Around University of Oregon, it's their magazine that they come out with, and I get this thing at my house too. You know, it's because I'm an alumnus, so yeah, they want me to pay attention, and there's probably going to be money behind that they expect out of this sometime. They're not going to get it because I went into a career that does not pay very well, but it's okay. Anyway, so what is this article about? Well, it's a faculty member at the University of Oregon, Stellanos Lauka, I presume that's how it's pronounced, who's in the Institute of Ecology and Evolution. Yeah, it's a great place. I approve of everything the University of Oregon does. And what he says is our finding casts serious doubts over literally thousands of studies that use phylogenetic trees of extant data to reconstruct the diversification history of taxa. And yeah, this is legit. I kind of see where he's coming from. When I looked at the actual paper in Nature, it got published in Nature, good for them. Here's what it is. It's a mathematical study, so there's lots of math here, which I'm not going to get into. And what he's saying is that without further information or biologically well justified constraints and general extant time trees alone cannot be used to reliably infer speciation rates. Yeah, and this is true, perfectly legitimate, that this is an ongoing issue in phylogenetic studies, that yeah, if you can build a tree, and even building a tree is, anybody who does this stuff knows this is difficult stuff. Just the problem of rooting a tree, for instance, that there are multiple possible answers to the structure of a tree that you assemble. So yeah, so I'm not going to argue with this. I would prefer somebody who is more expert in constructing phylogenetic trees would discuss it. But what he's pointing out is that there's a whole bunch of variables here. And these multiple variables mean that it's a thorny problem to infer the time data from extant trees. So yeah, you could go out and you could sequence a whole bunch of spiders, for instance, and you could build a best possible phylogenetic tree to illustrate their relationships. So that's ongoing. But then what you want to do is, for instance, say, okay, Steatota borealis and Steatota triangulosa, when did they diverge? And you would make a best guess, you would make an estimate from that data about how long ago those two species separated. And what this paper is saying is that that inference is incomplete. You need other information in order to do this. That it's, for instance, what he's talking about here is lambda is the speciation rate. How often do you get new species out of this lineage? Mu is the extinction rate, that without further data, you cannot figure out precisely what that is. You're just going to be able to make an estimate. So, and again, I would agree with this, that a lot of this phylogenetic analysis requires best estimate values for these sorts of things. And in particular, what this paper is pointing out is that you need the paleontological data. That fossil data helps you ground your tree, the timing of your tree. And we often don't have that. So for my example of spiders, we do not have good examples of species like borealis and triangulosa from 100,000 years ago or 500,000 years ago. It just doesn't exist. And we don't expect to be able to find those fossils. So it's just pointing out a perfectly legitimate conclusion, that our inferences about the rates of speciation are tentative, and the more data we can accumulate, the better it is. So yeah, so if you're hoping that I was going to be coming on here and saying, oh, this is garbage, no, this I can't, Bret Weinstein, garbage, this is part of the process of modeling evolutionary trees, and I have absolutely no problem with this. Okay, we got questions in the chat. Oh, let's see, there's a couple. Do you know the humidor joke? That room they broadcast from, that's Tucker Carlson's, is all wood like a humidor, and we think it affects their brains. Okay, I didn't know that joke, but yeah, I believe it. Tucker Carlson is just, not worth talking about. From Nestle, a hard question. What is your opinion on the basal phylogenetic relationships of metazoans, sponges, ctenophores, placozoa, cnidarians, and nephrozoa? Like there is a debate on the oldest split. That's actually kind of relevant to this paper I just talked about. And I don't know. I'm not a phylogeneticist. I'm not one of those people who does a lot of mathematical modeling and analysis of clades and all that kind of thing. And so I kind of sit quietly and read attentively and try to assess what's coming out of the scientific literature. And I don't know, there's a whole bunch of contentious stuff in there. In particular, what I'm interested in is evolution of the nervous system, for instance. And that's a mess. We don't know that there's a whole bunch of complicated stuff going on in there that, there's debate about the homology of the nervous system in general. Is an insect nervous system homologous to a vertebrate nervous system? And I kind of think it is. I think there's enough detail in the molecular biology of the nervous system that sure we could make that inference. But how you line up such different nervous systems, I'm completely up in the sky about. I don't know. So Nestle was going to bet on sponges as being down there at the base of the trees. Yeah, but there's different kinds of sponges. Which sponges? Yeah, it's and there's stuff in the sponge molecular biology that makes it a messier story, especially if you're thinking about in the context of the nervous system. They have some features that we would think evolved from an ancestral nervous system. And then sponges are kind of a degenerate form of that. They've lost some of those details. Yeah, I don't know. Okay, another question. Could you please clearly state on video that the Quran is wrong about embryology so that even a Nadir Ahmed will understand it? Yeah, that was a recent controversy. Nadir Ahmed is a fool. He has a poor reputation even among Islamic scientists. He's not very good. He's constantly trying to get people to state that something in the Quran is explicitly modern science, and he's wrong. And here's the problem I have with just saying what you were requesting, is that the Quran is not an embryology textbook. It doesn't even try to be embryologically based. It is vague. We are quibbling over a couple of sentences. And on the one hand, I kind of like that what the Quran does is it reflects the understanding of development at the time it was written. So in that sense, it's a good mirror for how people were thinking about development at that time. So yeah, it's good in the sense that it argues for a progressive development. So it's arguing that, against the old idea that the embryo was formed in the womb by the sperm entering, and that it's complete and it just has to grow and all this other stuff. The Quran actually sides with the ideas of Aristotle that no, there's progressive differentiation, that new tissues emerge over time. So in that sense, it's kind of nice. Yeah, I approve of that. But where it's wrong is when it starts talking about specifics. So the Quran pretends to detailed knowledge of the specifics of the progression of that differentiation, and that it gets wrong. That in particular, it, let me say that there's two things I find wrong about the Quran's presentation of embryology. Number one is that it is asserting knowledge it does not have. That Muhammad, who presumably authored the Quran, is pretending to a certainty that is not in his possession. And that's one of those nasty things that creationists often do. No, he didn't know much about embryology. He had a little bit of hearsay that he picked up, from conversations in the marketplace, from conversations with other scholars. But he's not an embryologist. He never was. Okay, that's one thing. And then the other thing is that along those lines, he pretends to have knowledge of a specific sequence, right? That first bones form and then muscles form, and that you get this clothing of a skeletal system with later emergent tissues like muscle. And that's not the case. That when we look at what development occurs in development, that what happens is there is a tissue, a generic tissue, a general tissue like mesoderm that develops, and then condensations within that mesoderm form bones and muscles. So it's not a strict sequence like he pretends. So yeah, that's where I say it's totally wrong. But Ahmed, talking about Nadir Ahmed is like talking about Tucker Carlson. Okay, this is not a legitimate conversation. Okay, this is still talking about the phylogenetic split in there. He says, I don't know if the nerve nets of like flatworms and jellyfish operate on a Turing pattern, but in any case, perhaps the organization like brains is independent. Yeah, that's a whole issue. Is when we're talking about the development and evolution of the nervous system, that there are clearly components that are present that are homologous in vertebrates and invertebrates. The molecular components of that. And then the question is the actual structure of that nervous system homologous? And I don't know. Yeah, I'll keep reading. It's an interesting question. I don't know the answer. Damn, this is where I get totally screwed, because I don't get to be an oracle like the Quran and say, oh, this is the way it is. This is the way I have to say some things I don't know. Okay, let's see. Where am I? Oh, there I am. Let me stop sharing that screen. Let's set that aside. But what's relevant about that article in Nature and the Oregon publication is this is perfectly legitimate to say we don't know some things, that there are questions still pending in evolutionary biology, and scientists are willing to come out and say, hey, we don't know this. This is something where we don't have sufficient information to say one way or the other. But again, the Oregon paper, the Lauka paper, is not saying that we didn't evolve. It's just saying there's uncertainty in the chronology of the evolution of these things. And if you're saying, well, there's uncertainty, that uncertainty does not encompass the idea that all species evolved 6,000 years ago by fiat from a divine being. That does not fit. Okay. Let's see, other questions. Yeah, life has had, okay, Mr. Piece of Work says, life has had at least 500 million years to experiment, and many don't seem to understand that. Yeah, that there's a whole bunch of stuff going on. It's more complicated than people want to imagine. Yeah, we're still not done. Let's see. Netflix says, I know that the positions of the major veins are canalized, but the capillaries which don't have a strictly defined organization, do they operate on a Turing mechanism? Ah, yeah. Okay. Now we're getting into arteries and veins. Yes, they are. So med students know this, that, if you go in and dissect a cadaver, it's fairly predictable where you'll find the major veins and arteries. That, yeah, you're going to find an aorta, but at the same time, there's variation that's present in the branching patterns off of the aorta. There's a majority pattern that pretty reliably emerges, but at the same time, there are also these rarer cases that also emerge, and they're also part of the variation that's extant in human populations. To bring in another hot button issue, yeah, this is the same thing that we talk about when we talk about sex and gender, that there's variations in the anatomy of sex. They're legit, they're real. You don't get to say that everything must fit a particular pattern. Sex is also strongly canalized. It occurs in a particular pattern most often, but there are also variations out there. Okay, Boomer U says, what aboutism is a branch of creation science and well developed? Yeah, that's what they do. Well, what about this? Doesn't that call into question your whole worldview? And no, it doesn't, because our worldview is not so harshly defined as the creationist worldview. Okay, let's see. Let me bring in another paper. Another article I found kind of interesting, and this one is really troubling. This one bugs the heck out of me. Let's see, where did I go? I'm juggling so many windows here. Okay, let's see. We're going to share another screen, and it's this one. This is kind of interesting. This is in Vice. Not my favorite source, but it's an interesting article they bring up. Anyone out there vape? I'm not going to chew you out for vaping. Vaping is one of those things that some people do. I don't like the habit myself, but okay, it's better than smoking, I guess, maybe. Although this makes me question this. So JUUL, which is one of these companies that markets vapes and all the apparatus that goes with them, bought a science journal. Oh man, well, an issue of a science journal. And so JUUL spent $51,000 to buy the entire issue in order to post a whole bunch of articles in it. And just right there, just stop right there and think, oh no, that you can't do this. This is unethical, unbelievable. They're trying to buy scientific credibility for the idea that vaping is safer and better and a good way to break the habit of smoking and all this kind of stuff. And they don't seem to realize that just the act of buying out a journal calls their entire premise into question. This is not credible. I'm not going to believe anything published in this journal. Yeah, so they've undermined themselves and they've undermined this journal. Anyway, Vice took a look at the article and went through it. And I won't go through the whole thing, but it's kind of what you'd expect. So the findings from several studies in this issue clearly point to JUUL as an effective smoking cessation tool. That's the point they want to make. And yeah, as Mr. Piece of Work says, it immediately discredits it. So this is an interesting article. It goes through and it shows, each article what they're doing. So so there's one study, for instance, prevalence of JUUL use by smoking status in a national sample of students. Yeah, so they go look through all these JUUL users, and they find that JUUL use by adult never smokers was uncommon. So I'm a never smoker, and I am not tempted to use JUUL. So yeah, it's saying that less than 1% of adult never smokers are currently using JUUL. So that's kind of nice. It's saying JUUL is not a tool for recruiting people to smoke cigarettes. Okay, fine. Or to start vaping. But then conflict of interest, co-authored by 2 full-time employees of JUUL Labs. All right. And smoking trajectories of adult never smokers 12 months after first purchase of a JUUL starter kit. They have starter kits? Doesn't that bother anyone? Here's a starter kit, so we can get you hooked on this habit. Yeah, participants are much less likely to smoke with each passing day. A JUUL was used instead. Okay. And again, co-authored by a JUUL consultant. You get the idea. I don't need to go through all. They're all kind of the same thing, that they're all posting positive results that using a vape does not lead you to use cigarettes, and that it doesn't draw in new users. But then where do new users of vaping gear come from? Yeah. So it's saying, okay, yeah, it's going to have a positive impact on population mortality. As far as we know so far, from what I've read, from what I've heard, vaping is maybe less dangerous than smoking cigarettes or cigars or anything like that. It doesn't have the same outcomes as tobacco smoking. But I think the question is, are there additional new problems with using this stuff? And they're not going to get into that. But what this, again, go through the whole thing. What it's all about is, that they're going to have this, now they're going to have this scientific journal that they can cite whenever people question the dangers of vaping. Great. This is the same thing that tobacco companies did. That we're doing in the 50s and 60s. So yeah, I'm really not that impressed. This is going to be something where I'm sure in the future I'm going to get people telling me that vaping is not a big issue on my blog. It's not a big issue for me, but I'm going to get people who are going to come to me and say, "Oh, here's a scientific paper that says, yeah, it's okay," and it doesn't. It's not a credible source. So, oh boy. Anyway, that's going to be out there now. Yeah, as Phoenix Marine says, starter kits, grr. Just the fact that they're coming out with something to get people hooked on this new habit. There's arguments you could make that vaping is a tool to get hardcore nicotine and tobacco users off the habit. And, I could see, well, for instance, I might say, I've got a mother, my mother is a hardcore smoker. Got a bad habit that she's had for, longer than I've been alive. And would this be a good tool to help her she's got respiratory problems. Would this be a good tool to get her off? I don't know that it was, because it would be incorporating a whole set of new variables. These vapes, they use solvents. I don't know, what do those solvents do to somebody who's got pulmonary and respiratory disease? Is that in the journal? I didn't notice anything on that. Yeah, but that's the kind of thing where only an irresponsible doctor would suggest that you go and adopt this brand new habit on top of your old bad habit. No, I'm not going to go for it. Yes, Mr. Pierre's piece of work says, how does the peer review system work? I don't know, apparently. You just got to spend enough money. And I would say that there's an even more substantial issue here, deeper problem, in that to publish anything, scientists typically have to pay money. They have to, you don't get paid for publishing in a scientific journal. You have to pay for the privilege of publishing in that journal. And how that skews things is, oh, sociology of science, could you come in and take a look at this and fix it for us? Yeah, it's a problem. Okay. Let me stop sharing that piece of noise. It's just horrifying that this is what we've come to. Okay, let's see. Oh, the questions. There was a question here. Oh, about spiders. I said I was going to avoid spiders, but okay. For Mr. Piecework, how do spiders overwinter? Do they only do their thing for one season and leave eggs for the next? It varies by species. Some species in tropical climates don't have to worry about this issue. That it's going to get a little cooler, but they're still going to be able to thrive even in the winter. So the overwintering is not an issue for them. Here, it's a question that interests me because up here in Minnesota, it gets really, really cold in the winter. Yeah, spiders do not survive. I've done some tentative studies where I've looked at the Parasteatoda that live around my house, and I track them. I know who they are. I've given a few of them names, and I watch them over the summer, and then the winter slowly descends on us, and yeah, the end result of late fall is they die. It's tragic. There were a couple of spiders around my house that I was actually out there with a laser thermometer measuring their temperature in the morning to see what happens. And yeah, when they get down around -3, -4 degrees centigrade, they die. They got these nice comfortable nests and then they croak. It's really tragic. On the other hand, Parasteatoda, for instance, is synanthropic species, and they live with humans. And so I suspect that a lot of what's happening is, as the fall descends, they crawl into the house and they go into the attic and they go into the spaces in the walls, and they find cozy spots in the garage, and they hunker down and they basically hibernate. They cool down and they just don't do anything. So yeah, they kind of survive, I think. I haven't found specific examples of Parasteatoda surviving the winter. We'll have to see. Others, yeah, it's survival through the subsequent generations. So yeah, they're gonna lay eggs. They're gonna place them in the coziest places they can find, and then they'll hatch out in the spring. So Argiope, for instance, these great big yellow garden spiders, the huge ones that get legs spanning this like this. We've been trying to find them. We've been looking around for them, and no, we're not finding them right now. But in August, I'm sure we're going to find lots of them. They just come out of nowhere. No, what's happening is those spiders lay eggs in nice cozy egg sacs that survive the winter, and they're going to emerge in around about now, and they're going to start eating insects, and they're going to start out small and they're going to get bigger. Argiope, for instance, we know really gobbles down grasshoppers, and the grasshoppers have started to emerge in large numbers, so I bet you I take advantage of that. So we'll see. And then, of course, there are other species that live in the leaf litter, and they burrow down. They get down into the crud that's piling up as fall proceeds, and they will be buried under the snow. And when you're under the snow, yeah, that's cold, but it's not lethal. And they will thrive down there. Well, thrive. They will wait. They will lurk. They will wait for spring, and then they'll reemerge. So lots of different ways that spiders survive the winter. Okay. Yeah, what survived the freeze here in Texas? Many plants that I thought were toast actually held up under the snow. Right, snow is kind of insulating. Yeah, you get down into the deep under the snow, and you're around 0 degrees centigrade. But lots of things can survive that, especially the ones that have like antifreeze proteins in that. And there, I've got some published literature out there that I found that says, the spiders I study actually do have antifreeze, so of some sort. The fact that they can survive at -3, -4, -5 degrees centigrade, even, without freezing solid, tells you there's something going on in there to help them keep alive. Let's see what else. What can we, as a laypersons, do to help a wide variety of wildlife survive winter, or for that matter, very dry periods? Good question. Do you think I'm an environmental biologist, an ecologist? I'm not, but okay. Uh, yeah, my wife has been doing a lot of stuff along those lines. So she has been planting native plants outside. So yeah, the native, you got to figure before people showed up here 10,000 years ago, well, then this was all glaciated, but farther south, there were lots of species that were surviving the winter without our help. And the secret is to have diverse environments, to have lots of plant diversity, to have lots of microenvironments where they can thrive. And that's a good thing to cultivate. Yeah, the typical Midwestern American lawn is deadly. It kills things. A lot of things don't survive that sort of environment. So planting more things, getting a lawn that's got more diversity in it is just a big secret to doing that. I will confess, we have a lawn. Ooh, I'm looking at it. It's kind of a brown lawn right now. It's been miserable weather lately. We've got a lawn out front of our house so that, we fit in with the neighborhood. But our backyard, we've been kind of letting go to seed, and there's a lot of stuff thriving out there. 2 years ago, Mary planted a perennial garden for me for Father's Day. Just a bunch of the local plants, all looking kind of weedy and all that kind of stuff, out in the backyard, and that's been doing pretty well. Our neighbors across the street have a rain garden. I think that's a great thing to do too. There's a company that comes around. They'll excavate out a little shallow depression in your lawn, and they'll plant native plants, and that's another great strategy is doing that. I would love to do that in our lawn, but we're kind of on a budget right now. It would be worth it, I think, once we've got a little cushion to invest in something like that. Also, our front lawn, another reason we haven't done anything with it is our front lawn, the previous owner put all these underground irrigation systems there. So there's this PVC pipe under our front lawn. We would have to start digging that up and remove it. It's actually totally useless right now because about 10, 12 years ago, we had a major rupture of the water line to our house. It flooded our basement, all this kind of stuff. And the city brought out a backhoe and was just trenching through our yard. You can imagine what that did to that underground irrigation system that was installed. It's defunct. So anyway, we'd have to dig that up. Anyway, there's things. Let's see. Oh, other suggestions from the chat. Keep your garden untidy. Grow native flora. Poke holes in fences. Yeah, find local river keeper groups and join in. Yeah, there's lots of things you can do. One of my colleagues at the university is big on this kind of thing, and she works with the city planners and all. She's on the city council or the city planning committee. Yeah, the city planning committee, and they're doing all this kinds of things. The city is also supportive. They have they will come around and plant trees. This has been a big issue around here because, you know, Dutch elm disease, we have lost so many trees in this area. So they come in and plant new trees, different varieties that are resistant, that aren't Dutch elm. Yeah, we've lost it. We had a gigantic slippery elm out back that it just had to go. It's tragic. So yeah, things like that. Do encourage that sort of thing. The Morris City Council has been getting somewhat more progressive over the years. Yeah, so this is another strategy. Vote out the Republicans. Just get rid of them. It's tough in a very red area like this. But yeah, get rid of the Republicans, and that helps. They've been doing things like sponsoring the Art Council. Big chunks of downtown Morris are getting repainted with murals and all these spectacular, colorful things. That doesn't help the wildlife, but helps the environment. Okay, I got a question here. Do you know the New Zealand glowworm? Would you agree that the hanging down silk threads is a weaker nest than a spider web? Oh, there's a lot of literature on this. Yeah, I would agree that just dangling a web down, just dangling silk threads down to try and catch things is less elaborate than most of the spider webs that we're familiar with. But there's a huge variety of spider webs that are out there, and different strategies for different folks. Yeah, so the New Zealand glowworm is apparently doing quite well with these dangling webs with droplets of sticky goo and snagging things. And yeah, so who am I to judge? Yeah, do it your own way. So, but then, you know, when you look at different spiders, like right now we've got the orb weavers out there, and they're kind of the, you know, those nice circular planar webs. Uh, is that more sophisticated and complicated than cobwebs? And I don't think you could say that they are. Cobwebs are a three-dimensional web instead of a two-dimensional web, and they're pretty neat. So, nah, and then there's all these other strategies, like there's some spiders that throw silk, and you know, they like a bolo, and they capture prey that way. Trapdoor spiders, where they just build a sensory net, and when something steps on it, they leap out and consume it. So lots of strategies. More diversity is always good. Yeah, let's have a lot. Oh, and you know, like right here, we've got those ground spiders, those grass spiders that are all over in my lawn that I was just disparaging. But the grass spiders love it. They every morning you go out with, you've got dew. It's so spectacular because there's all these tents all over the lawn that are inhabited by little grass spiders. Okay. So, oh yeah, no, this is just stop using chemical herbicides and pesticides. Yeah, we don't. We don't spray our lawn. My wife occasionally gets tempted because the dandelions take over. Yeah, in the spring, our lawn turns yellow, and it makes her very frustrated. And partly, again, that's a social thing because the neighbors will look at you and they'll say, "Oh, you're not taking care of your lawn properly." And I have to resist and say, "No, more dandelions, let them take over. More clover, let's get all that good stuff growing in there. Let's get all kinds of varieties of plants thriving in here." Now, oh, cut your lawn high. Yeah, that's another good idea. Don't cut it too short. That also diminishes diversity. Okay, let's see. Oh, we've had an hour. Do I want to mention one other thing that's not, it's not truly the kind of science you expect, but I want to talk about briefly, I promise, briefly about this article that's in Vox that I kind of liked. Oh, and once again, I lost. There we go. So you see, you've got my Zoom screen, and then I got all these other screens that I want to show, and they tend to disappear. But let's see if I can find this. Yes. Okay, this is an article in Vox. It's about Twitter and how Twitter can ruin your life. But it's specifically about Isabel Fall and her sexually identify as an attack helicopter. Did anyone out there read this article or Isabel Fall's story? I did. I linked to it on the blog way back when. I really liked it. I thought it was a great story. It's where she basically runs with this terrible metaphor that's used against trans people that, oh well, if you do identify as an attack helicopter or whatever. And she took it seriously, said, okay, what if somebody did identify as an attack helicopter, and does a little future history speculation, what if the technology gets to the point where you could implant a mind in an attack helicopter or anything else for that matter. And she just runs with it. And I thought it was a fascinating story addressing the whole ideas of, the idea of transhumanism. If we're going to take transhumanism seriously, this is a beautiful example of what's going on there. This idea that we could be something other than the identity that is associated with our human bodies. I think it's perfectly acceptable that somebody could decide that they're a different sex than they were born with, and sure, do whatever you need. That there's different levels of transformation. There's the mental transformation, there's the physical transformation. You can go through surgery, you can go through hormones, all this kind of good stuff. And it really brings into question the whole idea of what makes a person. And this story is about a case where it's entirely fictional, of course, but they are now an attack helicopter, and it plays with that idea. That whole idea of what is an identity. And it was really well written. I really enjoyed it. But as it turns out, Twitter got a hold of it, and it turned into this nightmare shitstorm. This person, Isabel Fall, who wrote it, she's a trans woman early in transition, and people jumped on her about it. It was just so much hate from both sides, that there were, left-leaning transgender people who thought she was making fun of them. And then there were the right-wingers who always hate anything about changing identities. And like it says, her life fell apart. She requested that the story be taken down. So I guess it's a little harder to find nowadays. Yeah. And yeah, I just wanted to throw that out here. This is yeah. So people accused her of being a troll. That having a different point of view is not being a troll. And yeah. So anyway, I didn't have a lot I wanted to say about this, so it's kind of appropriate that I bring it at the end of this session as we're about to end. But it's just something to think about. Yeah. I was just curious to see if there were people who felt similarly about all of this. Okay, it's all a serious distraction from the real issues, in my opinion. Yeah, there are legitimate points of view you can take in dissent from this story. That transforming into an attack helicopter is not something in the range of feasibility right now. That most people can be uncomfortable with their identity and yet not go so far as to say, oh, I want to be a machine. So that's a case that you could say that, yeah, it's a distraction. But it's science fiction, it's philosophy. Yeah, like it says here, Fall tries to take the meme seriously. What would it be like if your gender was actually helicopter? And like it says, it explores 3 separate but interconnected ideas. Gender is an innate part of the self, gender is a performance for society, and gender is a literal weapon of the state. It's stuff worth thinking about. And not something I can really think about in great detail right now, because we're going to wind this up. But I'll just leave that with you to think about for the future. And I'll include links to this in the YouTube page. So yeah, if we want to discuss about it more, we can do that. I'll link right here and say that this has been fun. Thanks everyone for showing up. And I want to do this a little more regularly. So I will try to do this, not every week, I don't think, but maybe every couple of weeks. I also want to acknowledge that, I got these Patreon supporters who actually give me money, and I got to think of ways to reward them a little better. There's been long periods of neglect of my Patreon site. So I do want to invest more time in that kind of thing. And nobody took me up on it, but I did make this open to my Patreon supporters to join in the Zoom conversation. Maybe we'll see if that happens. I also respect the fact that many people do not want to go public and make noise about all of this. But hey, we'll do it again. Joe Smith, yeah, you missed it. But it's okay. Like I said, I'm going to try and do this fairly more often. Oh, and Berger recommends Agency by William Gibson. Yeah, Gibson is interesting. This Isabel Fall story was way out there. We're talking maybe a century down the road, we could do this. Gibson's specialty is what's going to happen in just 10 years from now, and thinking about that. Sometimes he misses, sometimes he hits right in. So yeah, we'll see. Okay, so I will let you all go there, and I'll just promise to try and be more regular about doing this every couple of weeks. Another thing I'm thinking about, I don't know if the other people are thinking about, is we have this Discord server that's underutilized, and I'm thinking we should have a Discord voice stream and just get together and let people babble on that. So if you're on our Discord, say whether you want that sort of thing. If you're not on our Discord, it's free and cheap and easy. Just sign on. I will post a link to that on the YouTube channel too. So it's pretty easy to get into. Oh, you guys quit bringing up these provocative topics. So Callisto says Ian Banks' culture novels have some good stuff on AI. Yeah, there is some good stuff on. That's a very optimistic view. Yeah, I got into a Facebook discussion with somebody, a transhumanist supporter, a while, and I disagreed with him very strongly. So that's also something, this whole issue of transhumanism. I think most transhumanists are full of it, but it's a direction to think about. Okay, so let me end it there. How long has it been? Hour and 13 minutes. I've been going on too long. So thanks again for coming, everyone. We'll try to get together more regularly. And so long. Ending the stream now.